Good afternoon, youth scientists. Thanks so much for tuning in and joining us today. My name is Sarah. I work in the education department here at the Aquarium of the Pacific in Long Beach, California. And we are so excited that you've joined us today because we are actually going to go behind the scenes of our aquarium. Now, we know that you're watching a lot of these virtual programs, and so you're seeing a lot of our sort of animals and exhibits through your screen, but we're actually going to take a look behind all that stuff you see and look more in depth on how we build or construct these exhibits and the habitats for our animals. So if that sounds like something you're interested in, hang tight with us and we are going to take a look behind the scenes. Now, when we're exploring behind the scenes, if you have questions about anything you're seeing, if you have observations you'd like to share, if you just want to share, say hello, send in your comments, we do have a text line. You can text in the number. And I'm not alone in the studio. Dana is behind, she's waving, she's behind the computer controlling what you see behind me. And she's going to put up a number for you to text in. Now here's that number. That number is 562-286-1838. So if you have questions, if you want to know more about something, if you want to share your observations, text us those responses. And I have Cynthia who's at the computer, and she's going to take in all your responses and questions and then pass them along to me. And we'll try and answer as many questions as we can on air. Now, if you're watching this program and we're no longer live, so it's no longer August 18th at 1 p.m., but you still have questions or comments, we still want to hear from you. But we're going to ask that you email us instead of texting us because we're not always manning that text line. And the email is right below this phone number. It's live@lbaop.org. And we'll be able to respond to your questions and observations through that email. So text us if we're live, email us if it's after, and let's get started. So we're going to take a look at some of our exhibits. We're going to start sort of on a broad scale, and then we're going to look much closer at how we design or the things we think about for a specific exhibit, focusing on our giant Pacific octopus. But first, we're going to take a look at some of the exhibits we have here. So I'm going to have Dana bring up our blue cavern exhibit. So that's one of our larger exhibits here at the aquarium. So here it is right here. And I want you to just take a moment and make some observations. What do you see in this video? So this is live, or is this live? We have webcams in a lot of our exhibits, so we can watch it live, and then sometimes we'll go back in the feed to look at specific animals or a different time of the day. But you can always log onto our website and access our webcams to see what's happening in our exhibits. Now, Blue Cavern is based off of a habitat, or a kelp forest habitat, and it's based off a real dive site that we find here in California off of the island of Catalina, which is about 23 miles from us here in Long Beach. Now, a lot of factors go into building an exhibit. So this specific exhibit is built after a specific type of habitat, that kelp forest, like I mentioned. So there's a lot of things that we have to think about when building a kelp forest. So we take a look here. What do you see in this exhibit? We see rocks. There's a lot of big rocks. We see maybe some fish. We see all this stuff right here. This is the kelp for that kelp forest. What colors do you see? Sort of muted colors, right? Kind of blues and greens and browns. So kind of take a picture of this exhibit, keep it in your mind. And now I'm going to have Dana, she is going to move to a kelp forest out in the ocean. And I want to see if we can compare. How do they look? Do they look the same? Do they look different? Kind of see what we can notice between those two images. All right, so Dana is working on it. She's going to bring up that image. Now, the image that we're going to be looking at is footage that we got from NOAA, which is the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Association. Now, this is a kelp forest out in the ocean. Now, obviously, it does look a little bit different, but do you see any similarities between this kelp forest and the one in our exhibit? I mean, we don't have a seal in our exhibit, but check out that kelp. All these plants are similar. There's rocks on the bottom, and the colors are very similar. So we try and make our exhibits look naturalized, look just like they would if we were to go, look at all this kelp. I'm in the kelp forest. That's so cool. So we try to make our exhibits seem just like they would for the animals out there in the wild. Now, we already had some observations and comments come in. So Cora said they need places to hide and camouflage. Absolutely. So one of the things we have to consider when we're building the habitat for an animal is making sure that that animal has what that animal needs. So if the animal likes to hide, if they need to camouflage, we need to make sure there are places for that animal to hide, and there are structures that are the same color of that animal so that they can camouflage. Excellent. And then, they live in deep water. So also we have to consider where that animal lives. If it lives in deep water, we need to make sure that it has either deep enough water or that we can kind of mimic what it would feel like, all that pressure when they live in the deep water. And that has a lot to do with temperature as well as water chemistry. So we looked at a kelp forest. Now we're going to switch to a warmer water habitat and take a look at one of our exhibits and then out in the wild. So we're going to look at our tropical gallery, at our biggest exhibit here at the aquarium, our tropical Pacific. Dana's going to pull that up. So we're going to take a look and make some observations in this habitat. All right, so this is our tropical gallery. Like I said, this is our largest exhibit here at the aquarium. It looks very different from that kelp forest because it's a different type of habitat. So do you think we can make everything the same between those two habitats? The water temperature, the animals in there, the food that we feed them? Probably not. It's got to be really different and specific to where that habitat is found. So kelp forests, they're found in colder water. So we need to make sure that that water is colder and that the animals are okay in that temperature water. And then a habitat like this, like our coral reef, is a lot warmer. They're tropical. The water is warmer, and so there's different animals whose bodies can adjust that warmer water. So in this picture, we see a lot more colors. We also see a lot more animals. All right, now I'm going to have Dana. She's going to go back to the studio for just a moment, and then she's going to bring up some images of a coral reef out in the open ocean. And that way we can see how it looks similar to our coral reef here at the aquarium. So there's a lot of things that we have to think about. I've mentioned a couple already. Water temperature, the spaces, right? Cora mentioned that if they camouflage, or they need places to hide. So the structures in those exhibits are going to look different. The water quality is going to be different, and we're going to talk a little bit more about that later, but making sure that the filtration and how clean the water is and what goes through the water and what the water feels like, all of that is important to consider when we're building a habitat. All right, we're almost there. We have a lot of footage that we can use thanks to Noah, and so we're kind of trying to find the best images to show everyone. All right, so take a look. Now, obviously, this looks a little bit different from our exhibit, but we've got a lot of the bright colors that we saw in our exhibit. So when we build these exhibits, our exhibits are obviously man-made, but we want them to replicate or look just like they would or similar or feel like they would for these animals. So here we see lots of different fish using different types of coral. So it's not just all one coral. We didn't just stick with one type when we built our exhibit. We looked at images like this for inspiration when we built our exhibits. So we varied the types of coral, the shapes, the textures, the colors, and the animals as well. And that allows us to build these naturalized habitats that look like they would out in the wild for these animals. And that helps keep that animal healthy, and it helps make it a better home for them. All right, so let's kind of break it down. We're going to focus specifically on building a habitat for a giant Pacific octopus. Who likes octopus? I raise my hand. Cynthia's raising her hand. I think Dana's raising her hand too, but little hand raise. We all love octopus here. They are super intelligent animals. They are very cool to talk about. And we have one giant Pacific octopus here. His name is Godzilla. Now, when we got Godzilla, he was only 2 pounds, and now he's 23 pounds as of April. We may have had updates since then, but in April, he weighed in at 23 pounds. But giant Pacific octopus, here's a great picture of Godzilla. They can get about 60 pounds on average. Now, the largest giant Pacific octopus on record was 150 pounds, which is huge for an animal like an octopus, especially because these animals don't have any bone. So they're all soft and squishy. So it's all basically muscle. It's part of their body that weighs 150. Now, most of them, the average is about 60, and I think the largest that we've had here, it's only 51 pounds, and that was one of our past octopus. So right now, Godzilla is still growing and weighs in about 23 pounds, but there's a lot to consider when we're building an exhibit for Godzilla. And when we got Godzilla, we actually redid our octopus enclosure so that we could better serve this animal so they have a better home. So here, we're going to break down some of the things we had to consider. So some things we have to think about are, like I mentioned before, the water temperature. So giant Pacific octopus, they live in very cold water. We find octopus in all parts of the ocean, in warmer and colder water, just depending on the species. But giant Pacific octopus specifically are found in very cold water. So that's going to be sort of Northern California all the way up to Alaska. There's a lot of giant Pacific octopus that we find in the Pacific Northwest area. And that water is in the low 50s. Godzilla is in the coldest exhibit that we have here at the aquarium. And that's to help protect his body. He wouldn't do very well if the water was really warm like it would be in those coral reef habitats. So that's one thing we have to think about is what type of water that animal lives in. So Godzilla likes it really cold. That water is really cold. So we have to make sure that there is a chiller. Now, if you've never heard of a chiller for water, think about, what does it sound like it does? Chills the water. So it makes sure that the water stays nice and cold for that animal. And we have chillers that work in Godzilla's system. And there's also, we use a lot of technology that give us alerts. So we have a whole team who are what we call our life support team. And they are monitoring all of our life support systems. Now, life support systems are what make sure that the animals get the right things they need in the water and in their exhibit. And so there's alerts or alarms set up in all of our exhibits, just like these, that tell us some things. They tell us the temperature of the water. Step off so you can look at it. They also tell us the flow, so how the water is flowing in that exhibit. Because we need water moving through the exhibit, that helps oxygenate or replenish the oxygen that most of these animals are using when they breathe. So we have alerts set up. So if for some reason something happens, that chiller maybe malfunctions, if it breaks, it's going to send an alert to our life support team. And they know that something's wrong and they can go attend to that problem and help it. Because if that animal is used to water that's in the low 50s, and then all of a sudden that water spikes for too long, it can really affect the animal. It can make them really sick. And so we have these alerts set up so that if something happens, our team is alerted and they can go fix it. So water, the temperature is really important for us to consider when having an animal. Now, something else to consider, especially when we're looking at our giant Pacific octopus, is how the animal socializes with other animals. Think about when we looked at that kelp forest, we didn't see too many fish. There were some larger fish, but not as many animals as we saw in that kelp forest. So we have to think about how the animal is with other animals of the same kind or of other animals. So octopus in general are more solitary. So we have just one giant Pacific octopus. Ooh, can you find Godzilla in here? This is a cool picture. This is the new exhibit. And we only have one octopus in here because Godzilla is a solitary animal, which means he doesn't really like to be around other octopus. So that's something we have to consider. If we're going to put more than one animal in an exhibit, we need to make sure that they are social with each other. They won't get territorial, where they won't fight over space, and they won't harm each other. Now, looking at this, did you find Godzilla? The hint is to look for his suction cups. Think you spotted him right over here. Here's Godzilla hiding over here. And that kind of brings back what Cora mentioned about having places to hide and camouflage. And we'll talk about that in a minute. But another thing to think about, if we look in this exhibit, so there's only one octopus in here, but are there other animals in here? Take a look. What do you notice? We've got some types of algae, some big kelp in here. But if you said there's other animals, you're right. Look down here. There are some anemones and some different types of sea stars in here. But we have to consider maybe what that octopus would eat to make sure that we're not putting tank mates that it might eat. So that's another thing to consider, not only how they socialize with other animals of their kind, but other animals in general. We don't want to put animals in our exhibits who are likely going to prey on each other, because that's not very effective for us to have a nice tank and nice animals to look at. So we have to consider that, making sure that the animals that we put together in one exhibit can live peacefully with each other. So for our giant Pacific octopus, putting sea stars and putting anemones in there are safe for everyone. But we wouldn't want to put, say, clams or mussels in here. Why not? Why do you think we would want to avoid some of those animals? Or crabs? Because those are what the octopus eats. So we need to consider that. Even though we might find them out in the open ocean in the same exhibit, or not exhibit, the same habitat, the same environment, here in our exhibit, we don't want to have them together. So those are some other things we have to consider. Now, we also have to consider what we're feeding that animal, right? That's really important. We can't feed all the animals we have at the aquarium the exact same thing, because would they naturally eat the same thing? No, they all have different food sources. Now, for our octopus, we like to, and for all of our animals, really, we like to vary what we give them. So we'll give them a variety of food. They might have their favorites, but we try and change it up. So for our giant Pacific octopus, we'll feed a mix of clams and mussels. Sometimes we'll give some of our octopus some fish, and we want to vary it so that if there is some instance where we don't have one type of food, they aren't going to be relying on just that food. They can have something else they like to eat as well. So we have to think about their food as another component when we're designing or having an animal here at the aquarium. Now, we also have to think about movement. So I think we have some video of our GPO, or giant Pacific octopus, moving around their exhibit. So that's something else to think about, movement and also the size of the animal. We need to make sure that when we build an exhibit or we place an animal in an exhibit, they have enough space to move, but also to grow. It's not comfortable for us to be squished, right? That's not very comfortable. And we don't want our animals to be squished like that either. And we want them to be able to grow into their exhibit or to have another place to move them if they continue to grow. And that way our animals can stay healthy and their bodies can stretch out, they can move, they can get a lot of sort of exercise, if you will. And then we also have a place to move them into a larger exhibit if we need to. So this is Godzilla moving around his exhibit. So octopus, they have really long tentacles, and giant Pacific octopus, when they spread out their tentacles, can be really, really long. So we need to make sure that his exhibit has enough space for him to move. And considering that he could grow, he could even double his weight, we need to make sure there's enough room so even if he grows, he's comfortable in his exhibit. And then there's one other thing we need to consider before we kind of break down some of those things we talked about is special circumstances. So that is really important for all of our animals, thinking about not only all those things about what type of water they live in and what type of sort of tank mates they can have, but also if there's any special behaviors that the animal might exhibit that we need to consider. Here's some cool footage. So this is Godzilla. But we need to think about special circumstances about every individual animal. So if we're talking just about octopus, octopus are what we call escape artists. They are really good at getting out of their enclosures. They are very, very intelligent. And so we need to consider that. We can't put them in the same type of enclosure as we would a fish that's not likely to get out even if they could, right? They need to stay in the water. But octopus, they are known for getting out of their exhibits and causing problems, wreaking havoc wherever they go. And so we need to keep that in mind when building their exhibit to make sure that they won't be able to get out and they won't be able to hurt themselves in that process. So we'll take a look. This is behind the scenes of our giant Pacific exhibit. So I think this right here is the wall, and then here is the little window to the exhibit. Is that correct? Yeah, so we have an access door. So there's multiple doors to get to the behind the scenes area. And then we make sure that the tank walls are high enough for the octopus. And also a lot of aquariums, and I believe us too in some of our exhibits, will line the exhibit with AstroTurf. All the way up here. This right here, this door. I know what I'm looking at. This door right here, it looks kind of furry, and that's because it's AstroTurf. Think about turf fields where you play football or soccer on, and it's that fake grass, and it's really kind of itchy. Well, octopus think it's really itchy too, just like us. And they don't like the feel of it on their suction cups. They use their suction cups as a way to explore their world. They can smell with it. They can feel with those suction cups. And they don't like the feel of the AstroTurf on their suction cups. And so we line it with that AstroTurf so they're not likely to explore that area and try and get out of the exhibit. So we keep those kind of special circumstances in mind when we're building or creating these exhibits. Now we're going to take a look a little bit more behind the scenes. So even more than just looking at this little room. And we're going to look at sort of the filtration and more of the life support. So we had that picture before of those meters that showed the flow and the temperature and how they give alerts to our life support staff. But we do a lot of cleaning for our animals. And that is really important for these animals when we're building their exhibits to make sure that we have all the proper cleaning and that their exhibit stays clean for the health of that animal. So we do cleaning in a couple different ways. We have filtration systems, but we use 3 different types of filtration. So the first type of filtration we use is called a physical filtration. So it's an actual physical thing. Oh, so here's a filter bag. So we use a couple different types of physical filters. We use sand filters, which are these big drums, and we'll pull up a picture in just a moment. So these big drums, but this right here is called a filter bag. So this bag is pretty fine, and what happens is this tube right here, the water comes out from the exhibit, runs through that bag, and that bag is going to catch some of the bigger chunks of, say, food or waste, because all of our animals go to the bathroom, and they're going to go to the bathroom in their exhibit, and we need to make sure we're cleaning all those impurities out of the water so that animal remains healthy. And so as the water moves through this bag, the bag will catch some of those bigger chunks of waste or food, and the water filters through, and the water is a little bit cleaner as it moves through the bag. Now I think Dana's going to bring up a picture of our sand filter, which is another type of physical filter. And just like it sounds like, it's using sand to filter the water. So these things right here, this big drum is full of sand. And as the water moves through it, it catches the larger chunks of waste or food, and the water passes through, and that sand holds all that waste. And that's another way we can clean. So that's our first type of filtration, is our physical filter. Now the second is called a chemical filter. So the way we use chemical filters is we do something called a protein skimmer. Now, I believe we have a picture of a protein skimmer. Dana's going to find that. But what a protein skimmer does is it takes proteins out of the water. Oh, we got a video of a protein skimmer. So there are some proteins, obviously protein can be a good thing, but there are some proteins in the water that are not so great to have in the water, especially if it builds up. And so our protein skimmer basically skims that protein or all those sort of negative components in the water out of it. So this right here, this is our protein skimmer. So this here is a bubbler, and it makes all these bubbles that come up here. And as you can see, all those proteins, that kind of greenish, brownish stuff, attaches to those bubbles and ends up here, while the rest of the clean water gets passed along into our next filtration stage. Now, basically what is all up here is poop. So our protein skimmer does a really good job of taking out all the waste from the water. So this is what our protein skimmer looks like. We've got the cleaner water down here. The bubbles kind of rise to the top and push all those proteins up. They get caught up here while the clean water continues on filtration. Now, the last type of filtration we use is called biological filtration. And I'm actually going to go over to my document camera to show you one thing that we use for our biological filtration. So I have this camera over here that I'm going to turn on the light for. Hopefully it'll turn on. There we go. All right. So these two little plastic things don't really look like much of anything. Let's see if we can zoom in a little bit. So these are actually called bio balls. Oh, there we go. And what these are is they're little pieces of plastic, but what happens is there is a lot of surface area. All these little prongs provide a lot of surface area for bacteria to attach to or to grow on. And so we have these big drums that are full of these bio balls that as the water runs through, here we go. So this tower right here is full of those bio balls. And what happens is the water will go through and all that bad bacteria will attach to all the surfaces on those bio balls, pulling it out of the water. And the more surface that we have on those bio balls, that's why they look like a little circle or a sphere, but there's all these prongs that stick out in different directions. And the more surface area that is there in that ball, the more bacteria that can attach. So more surface for things to attach to. So that's the third way that we can clean our water. And we use all three of these, the physical, the chemical, and the biological to clean our water. So it's not just focusing on one, it's using all three to clean our water in all of our exhibits. So that's not specific just to our giant Pacific octopus. We use these type of filtration, all three of them, for all of our water here at the aquarium. And that really ensures that our animals stay healthy in their exhibit. Now that life support team, they check on the water, but we also even have a water quality team. And they are checking our water for the quality. They're making sure that that water is the right temperature, the right level of salinity in it, because there's different levels of salt in the water depending on where you are. If you're colder water, warmer water, depending on that location, the salt can be different. And they're just making sure that chemical makeup is exactly how it should be for that animal based on where that animal lives. So we have this huge team who work together to help make sure that our animals are safe and healthy in their exhibit. And that's all part of building a habitat for our animal. Now, if we look a little bit closer or a little bit more at some footage for our giant Pacific octopus, because these animals are really fascinating, and we have a lot of cool videos of this animal. So another thing that we didn't mention yet is enrichment. And this also kind of goes back to what Cora was saying about places to hide and camouflage. We want to allow our animal to act the way it would out in the wild. So that's allowing it to camouflage, allowing it to hide, but also allowing it to kind of work its brain. That's a muscle, right? And we need to make sure that we are working all of our animals' muscles. So here's our giant Pacific octopus. And what we did is there's this little boat right here. And I don't know if you can tell right here. Do you know what that is? Oop, right there. That's a crab. So that's a food source for our giant Pacific. Now, if you watch Godzilla, he knows he's got a snack there. And you know how we can tell he knows? Did you see his body texture change? And the color of his body? So octopus are really fascinating animals. They can not only change color, but also texture. And let's see what happens. Uh-oh. Looks like something's brewing. So Godzilla is kind of feeling around. Remember I mentioned their suction cups are used not only to hold on to things, but to smell and to feel. So we can smell that crab. Let's grab and hold that boat. Do you think he's just going to pluck the crab out of the boat? Make your guesses now. Oh no! So Godzilla took down that whole boat. He's not going to eat the boat. Don't worry. We'll recover that boat. But he is going to eat that crab. Whoa. Do you notice anything different about Godzilla's body? It's almost like he's really excited and happy that he got to eat. There's the boat. We recovered the boat, but sadly not the crab. That was Godzilla's meal. So what we just showed you, that video, that is something called enrichment. So obviously in the wild, an octopus is not going to come across a little toy boat with a crab in it, but they have to be able to get their food. And so because octopus are so smart, we give our octopus a lot of enrichment, a lot of sort of activities and ways to get their food rather than just handing it to them. And that helps them flex their muscles, their brain, their body. Here's another one. Here's another image. So sometimes what we'll do is we'll take a Mr. Potato Head and they've got that sort of back flap. We'll put their food inside that back flap. And then we have to allow the octopus to figure out how to get to their food. So they can smell it, but to flex their brain is to figure out how to get to the inside and pull out their food. We like to have fun with it. It's enrichment for our octopus, but also for our aquarists and for us as well. And I think, do we have the video in the box? So we have one more video. We're almost running out of time. We could keep talking about giant Pacific octopus, but we have one more video. This isn't a giant Pacific octopus, but it's another example of the kinds of enrichment we'll give our animals. So this video is going to show JJ, she's one of our aquarists, working with our red octopus and feeding it some food. The food is going to be in a little container, and we'll watch what that octopus does with that container. So these are kind of the special circumstances for an octopus, but we consider these things for all of our animals when we're building their exhibit or when we're interacting with that animal. We don't get animals here and just kind of leave them be and not interact with them at all, especially if they're used to having all these sort of enrichment and activities going on around them in their natural habitat. And so we make sure that they have enrichment, they are getting to interact, they are sort of not really hunting for their food, but they're active in their exhibit, not just kind of sitting sedentary and not moving at all. So there's a lot of factors that go into building our exhibits here, and we've talked about a lot of them. You ready? All right, so we're going to watch this video. So this little red octopus found that in this box was its food, and it opened the box, got inside, and then was like, see ya. So here, we're going to watch it from the beginning. So this is JJ. She's training our little red. So you see that lid snaps together to make it harder for the octopus to get out. But once that lid is off, the octopus is already exploring the world outside of its enclosure. Kind of flops its head over. So it's exploring. So it's using those suction cups to smell for its food. And you saw before, JJ put a little shrimp in there. And so here he found it. He had to find that little lid to open. And then plop right inside. And is like, all right, see you later. I'm going to enjoy my meal in peace. So that's another type of enrichment, is just allowing our octopus to explore the world around them and giving them that challenge to find their food. So kind of in a review, a lot of the things we talked about a lot of things to build our exhibit and things that go into designing and planning, building our exhibits for animals. So we think about a lot of things. We think about what that habitat looks like in its natural state, and then we try and replicate that here inside our aquarium. We talked about the water temperature, making sure that the water temperature and quality. So it's not only the temperature, but the salinity levels, the chemical makeup of that water reflects how it would in that animal's natural habitat. We talked about structures, right? That kelp before, the coral, making sure that that looks natural. And it is similar to how the animal would experience their world out in the wild. And that gives that animal a nice home to kind of be in. But we also talked about exploring and movement and the size of the animal. So we have to consider all these things. And then lastly, we talked about the special circumstances, like with our giant Pacific octopus, making sure they can't escape, making sure they have enrichment. All these things have to be considered when constructing and while caring for our animals. Well, you scientists, I hope you enjoyed taking a look behind the scenes with us today. We are about out of time, so I'm going to sign off, but we hope you join us tomorrow. We have a program called Discover Earth tomorrow, where you're going to be able to learn a lot about our Earth and take a look at different data sets and see kind of weather patterns and water patterns and learn some really neat things about how our Earth functions. Hope you have a good rest of your day, and we'll see you tomorrow.